Hey everyone, Tankenstein here. In this video, I have your very first gameplay and overview of the EFV, the Expeditionary Fighting Vehicle. This is a currently ranked 6 battle rating 9.3 light tank and is the top level reward for the Semper Fidelis event. This is a very interesting vehicle, being that in real life it was a prototype, never actually put into service, but it seemed actually somewhat promising, at least based on some of the specifications, being that this thing could move 72 kilometers per hour on land and I think around 42 kilometers per hour on water, which does translate to War Thunder to being the fastest amphibious vehicle on water in game. So pretty damn good. It even has actually pretty decent armor values relative to the type of vehicle that it is. You're looking at 64 millimeters of armor all around, mainly in the form of composite screens, but you also have some other things as well. You have some structural steel, which quite honestly does not help at all, but the composite screens being thick enough as they are will be able to stop most things like HMGs. So this will have kind of an edge up over things like, again, HMG carrying tanks, and will be slightly better protected than actually a good amount of light tanks in game, especially autocannon firing light tanks. Which brings me to the next thing, the autocannon. This has the 30mm Bushmaster 2, which is pretty decent for an autocannon, and as you can see with the MK258, you have up to 114 millimeters of armor pen, which, with a vehicle this quick, is actually pretty damn good. And if I'm not mistaken, this has Gen 2, Gen 3 thermals. I'm always so bad when it comes to actually determining if something's Gen 2 or Gen 3, but either way, the thermals actually look pretty damn good on this vehicle, which is also very much impressive. And has pretty good optics too, with up to 12 times zoom. So in general, this is a pretty quick vehicle. Even going into reverse, you're looking at 24.1 kilometers per hour, which again, isn't all too bad. So this is going to be a pretty decent vehicle. But enough of that. I've talked your ears off. Let's get into a few matches, see how this thing performs, and I'll also go over whether or not I think it might be worth purchasing, and possibly what the price would be if you want to purchase it. As said, let's get into it. So as stated in the intro, being that this vehicle is a light tank, it is also fairly lightly armored. Now thankfully it's not the most lightly armored light tank, it's among the better armored light tanks out there, but still it's pretty easily penetrated by pretty much anything from an autocannon upwards. But it does at least have some level of defense where you can stop HMGs. Now that's not really going to do too much, but it does help. Additionally, again, being that it's a light tank, this is an autocannon carrying light tank, it does have the 30mm Bushmaster, which really isn't fantastic. You're looking again at around 114 millimeters of armor pen at max with this thing, which means that frontal confrontations versus MBTs are pretty much never going to go your way. You're pretty much going to die versus them. And unfortunately, being that there are some autocannon carrying MBTs around this BR, like the Leopard 2K, like the KPZ-70, and other vehicles kind of similar to that, even some AMXs out there, this thing really is just not going to survive against a whole lot, just because again, you're not going to be able to pen them, and they're going to be able to pen you in numerous different ways. Now because of all that, you're pretty much going to have to utilize the mobility of the EFV, just pretty much the land-based mobility, because unfortunately in War Thunder, amphibious vehicles don't really do all too well in water. They're pretty much slow, they are easily seen, and they're just killed pretty much instantly. So whatever benefit you might get from this thing being somewhat quick in water, realistically speaking, it's just not going to work out in game. You can do it occasionally and you might get a sneak attack, especially in like a canal or something like that where it's somewhat below street level. That might be about the only time where you can actually use it with any level of success. So I would just avoid using the amphibious capability of this vehicle pretty much altogether, unless you're trying to do some meme thing or unless there's like a perfect scenario for you to do it. Now that said, being that this thing does have Gen 2 or Gen 3 thermals and it is very quick, and again it does have that autocannon, you're going to want to flank with the EFV, and that's pretty much going to be about the main role you can do. Flanking, scouting, base capping, pretty much the different roles having to do with speed, that's what you're going to want to do. This is not going to be a very good vehicle when it comes to sniping. In fact, it's downright terrible when it comes to sniping, unless you get like the occasional light tank from about a kilometer away, or even an MBT that you might just coincidentally be seeing the side or rear from. Those are going to be about the only times where you can actually snipe somewhat successfully with this vehicle. Otherwise, you'd be best to utilize utilize its scouting capabilities, and again its speed to be able to flank around the enemy and kind of shoot them from the weak side. Otherwise, you're going to have a very difficult time with the EFV, and the problem with the EFV is that it's just not really all too impressive of a vehicle. Thankfully, it is 9.3 BR, but to be quite honest with you, at 9.3 BR, I'd almost rather have the M3 Bradley, because at least it has a secondary insofar as its ATGMs are concerned, and in that way, I feel like it's almost kind of more versatile than the EFV, because with the EFV, you're almost kind of shoehorned into always flanking and always scouting, because there's not really all too much that you can do due to its unfortunately low penning cannon, or at least relatively low penning. I mean, I'm not saying that it's like a terrible cannon, because at least you can do decently well with it, but it does have its problems. And then of course you have your 3-man crew, which if you get shot by the enemy, because if they see you at all, of course they're going to shoot you, you're probably going to die if it's a shot from the front. Now if it's against the rear of this tank, being that it is so open, it is kind of empty in the rear of this tank, being that it was supposed to hold infantry, and of course there are no infantry in War Thunder, at least as of current, you're not going to die if they shoot you in the back. But if they do shoot you anywhere from the front, you're probably going to die in this thing, which means again, avoid head-on confrontations at all costs with the EFB, because it's just not going to be a good time. You simply don't have the armor for it, the size of this vehicle is too big, you have so much mobility you may as well flank, and again, your cannon is not powerful enough to take down pretty much any sort of MBT from the front. You might get lucky with some Leopard 1s, maybe some weak spots here or there that you just so happen to hit, but the autocannon armor pen and fire rate just simply are not good enough where you're not going to be able to get those lucky shots versus the front of an MBT all too often. Now with that said, let's go over some strengths and weaknesses of the EFV. And to start, as I said before, this vehicle has excellent mobility, going 72 kilometers per hour for its top speed, and it has a really nice power to weight ratio as well. And if you want, it does do pretty decently on water. Second, it does have Gen 2 or Gen 3 thermals. Again, I'm kind of bad with discovering what type of thermals it is, but they are good thermals nonetheless. For its third strength, the rear 2/3 or so of this vehicle is essentially going to be empty outside of its engine, meaning that shots will typically pass through without doing crew damage if they even hit there. For its fourth strength, in my opinion, it has very good turret traverse rate for 9.3 BR. Fifth, it has excellent cannon elevation angles, at least from the front of this vehicle, and I'll go over that in a moment. Beyond this, it has great gunner's optics, up to 12 times zoom, pretty damn good. For its seventh strength, it has a fully stabilized cannon, not guaranteed at this BR. For the most part, they are fully stabilized at this BR, but it is still kind of nice. And finally, while it doesn't matter for practical purposes, the EFV is amphibious and is, in theory, the fastest such vehicle on water in game. Now with that said, for its weaknesses, even though the armor isn't too bad for a light tank, it's still thin enough to be penned by autocannons and larger. Second, it only has a 3-man crew. Third, this is a huge vehicle. It's one of the larger light tanks in game. For its fourth weakness, the autocannon only has up to 114 millimeters of armor pen with its APF SDS shell. Mix that in with a slowish fire rate, and it becomes very difficult to destroy anything with armor from the front. For its fifth weakness, the cannon can only depress when facing forward, and very slightly around the sides of the front. The cannon will actually be forced to elevate when facing the rear, making targets behind you either difficult or even straight up impossible to hit. For its sixth weakness, it has an absolutely huge ammo rack. For its seventh weakness, it has a cramped crew in the front of the tank. Eighth, it lacks a commander sight, but that really, in my opinion, isn't too big of a deal at 9.3 BR, but it is kind of a big deal considering that this is a scout after all. And finally, it only has a coaxial LMG as its secondary weapon, meaning that you're not going to have an HMG of any kind, or even a top-mounted LMG would be kinda nice. So with all that being said, I mean, the EFV, it's a good vehicle, but the thing is, it's just kind of bland. I feel like the amphibious aspect of it is a bit of a gimmick. I'm sure it would have been okay in real life, but the fact of the matter is, here in War Thunder, where all that you're doing is facing tanks in effect, and occasionally aircraft, which by the way, this does not have an IRST auto-tracking feature, which I wouldn't really expect at 9.3 BR, but it is something to note, you're going to have kind of a difficult time with this vehicle, right? You're not going to be able to go up against enemy tanks for the most part from the front, because again, that 114 millimeters of armor pen, again, that is at 0 degrees and pretty much at point blank range. You're not going to be able to pen most vehicles from the front at this BR. Even MBTs that you fight in a down tier, you're still not going to be able to pen most of them. And so in many ways, I kind of feel like this is a slightly lower powered version of the CV9035 DK or NL, in that it does have more or less about the same cannon. Of course, those are slightly higher BR, and they do have a slightly higher armor pen, but more or less they kind of function the same. They have about the same fire rate, just about 15% more armor pen compared to what you have on the EFV, and that's pretty much it. Otherwise, they play pretty much identically, and to be honest with you, this feels very similar to those vehicles. And again, to be quite honest with you, and I do have reviews of at least one of those vehicles already up on my YouTube, I'm just not a big fan of that style of gameplay. Maybe it's me, maybe it's just this vehicle in general, but this vehicle is a very niche vehicle. It's a very specific vehicle. Whereas you have something like the 2S38, for example, where its cannon is actually not a handicap at all, but it's something that you can lean on. And yes, again, I know it's a higher BR, but it has no issues at all fighting tanks from the front even though it has an auto cannon. And so it's just the EFV, for whatever reason, it just doesn't feel all that great. It's very limited. You cannot fight tanks from the front. It's just one of those things where it's just you're kind of backed into a corner to play in a certain way. I mean, you look at something like the M3 Bradley, for example, that's 8.3 BR, as I said before, has an ATGM where you can actually fight against vehicles that are upwards of 10.0 BR with some levels of success, even though the M3 Bradley is only 8.3 BR. You look at the Stingray, for example, 9.3 BR, at least currently. That thing can actually perform a whole bunch more roles than what you can get, or at least it can be a little bit more upfront when it comes to fighting MBTs than what you can get with the EFV. And so the EFV, because it has mediocre armor, at least somewhat mediocre armor, I mean decent enough armor for a light tank, but it has that. It really is a very large vehicle. It doesn't have great armor pen, and 9.3 BR, yeah, it's great for flanking. Trust me, like, you can do really well when it comes to flanking. Of course, you do have to know exactly where enemy crew and modules are, because if you're just shooting your APF SDS or even your APDS at the side of an MBT, it might just go through with causing minimal damage, because again, these are 30mm shots, and they are sub-caliber shots at that if they're APDS and APF SDS, which means that they're just going to go through with causing minimal damage, minimal spalling. So you really have to know exactly where the enemy crew and the important modules are, like ammo racks. And so this is just kind of a somewhat difficult vehicle to play, in my opinion. It's not like a bad vehicle by any means, but you're kind of limited to just playing a certain number of roles in it, mainly against scouting, base capping, and flanking, which a lot of people might not like. So for that reason, I give it kind of a decent grade. I mean, like, it's a 5.0 out of 10, maybe a 5.25 out of 10 overall. It's just not all that great. It's not bad. It's kind of average. And if I were to buy it on the marketplace, I personally probably wouldn't spend much more than like $15 or $20 on it. To be honest with you, I don't really think it's all that great of a vehicle. It's a neat vehicle, and if we ever get like more amphibious warfare in game, this might be pretty good. But as of right now, the amphibious quality of it, especially its speed, is just kind of useless. It's more of a gimmick than anything. And then what it comes down to is its cannon, which is middling at best. You can't use it against the front of most MBTs because, of course, they're just going to be able to deflect whatever shots you throw at them. And even though its mobility is great on land, one thing I did not mention before is that this vehicle is so damn large. I mean, it looks kind of like the Sandcrawler from Star Wars. It's so damn large that if you're going over bumpy terrain, a lot of the time the front of the vehicle will kind of dig itself into the ground. You'll lose a lot of speed when you're just going over that terrain. So you don't really get to keep your speed all too well with it because of the shape, and the length of this vehicle is just not all that great when it comes to anything outside of just more or less flat terrain, especially on roads. So it's a decent enough vehicle, but you have to understand it is severely limited. It's not going to be a vehicle that can just shoot through pretty much anything else. And to be honest with you, to me, that just makes it somewhat unfun, but it is okay in some niches. So as I said, let me know what you guys think about the EFV in the comments below. I'm interested to hear your opinion. But either way, thanks again. I'll see you all on the other side. Take care, everyone.